Hello, Mr. Key back with my second video of the day. This one is the first of my bigger book series where I'm going to read you a chapter or two of a slightly longer story. So, the story I have chosen is called Wind in the Willows. It is a book by Kenneth Graham, and it was a story that I loved to have read to me when I was younger, and I thought maybe I could share that now with you. It's a great story, all about the springtime, all about the outdoors, and at a time when we might all feel a little bit trapped inside. Maybe we can live through the animals in this story and think about the wonderful spring that's going to start springing around us and out of our windows soon enough. Let's get started. Chapter 1. The Riverbank. The mole had been working very hard all morning spring cleaning his little home. First with brooms, then with dusters, then on ladders and steps and chairs, with a brush and a pail of whitewash. He had dust in his throat and eyes, and splashes of whitewash all over his black fur, and an aching back and weary arms. Spring was moving in the air above, and in the earth below and around him, penetrating even his dark and lowly little house with its spirit of divine discontent and longing. It was small wonder, then, that he flung down his brush on the floor and said, "Bother, and old blow, and hang spring cleaning," and bolted out of his house without even waiting to put on his coat. Something up above him was calling imperiously, and he made for the steep little tunnel which answered, in his case, to the gravelled carriage drive owned by animals whose residences are nearer to the sun and air. So he scraped and scratched and scrabbled and scrooged, and then he scrooged again and scrabbled and scratched and scraped, working busily with his little paws and muttering to himself, up we go, till at last, pop! His snout came out in the sunlight, and he found himself rolling in the warm grass of a giant meadow. "This is fine," he said to himself. "This is better than whitewashing." The sunshine struck hot on his fur. Soft breezes caressed his heated brow, and after the seclusion of the cellarage he had lived in so long, the carol of happy birds fell on his dulled hearing almost like a shout. Jumping up at 4 legs all at once, in the joy of living and the delight of spring without its cleaning, he pursued his way across the meadow till he reached the hedge on the far side. "Hold up," said an elderly rabbit at the gap. "6 pence for the privilege of passing by the private road." He was bowled over in an instant by the impatient and contemptuous mole, who trotted along the side of the hedge, chaffing the other rabbits as they peered hurriedly from their holes to see what the row was about. onion sauce," he jeered, and was gone before they could think of a thoroughly satisfactory reply. Then they all started grumbling at each other. "How stupid you are! Why didn't you tell him? Why didn't you say? You might have reminded him," and so on in the usual way. But of course it was then much too late, as is always the case. It all seemed too good to be true. Hither and thither through the meadows he rambled busily, along the hedgerows, across the copses, finding everywhere birds building, flowers budding, leaves thrusting, everything happy and progressive and occupied. And instead of having an uneasy conscience pricking him and whispering, "Whitewash," he somehow could only feel how jolly it was to be the only idle dog among all these busy citizens. After all, the best part of a holiday is perhaps not so much to be resting yourself, but to see others busy working. He thought his happiness was complete when, as he meandered aimlessly, suddenly he stood by the edge of a full-fledged river. Never in his life had he seen a river before. This sleek, sinuous, full-bodied animal, chasing and chuckling, gripping things with a gurgle and leaving them with a laugh, to fling itself off on fresh playmates that shook themselves free and were caught and held again. All was a shake and a shiver, glints and gleams and sparkles, rustle and swirl, chatter and bubble. The mole was bewitched, entranced, fascinated. By the side of the river he trotted, as one trots when very small, by the side of a man who holds one spellbound by exciting stories, and when tired at last he sat on the bank, while the river still chattered on to him, a babbling procession of the best stories in the world, sent from the heart of the earth to be told at last to the insatiable sea. As he sat on the grass and looked across the river, a dark hole in the bank opposite, just above the water's edge, caught his eyes, and he dreamily fell to considering what a nice, snug dwelling place it would make for an animal with few wants and a fond bijou riverside residence. Above flood level, and remote from the noise and dust, as he gazed, something bright and small seemed to twinkle down in the heart of it, vanished, and then twinkled once more, like a tiny star. But it could hardly be a star in such an unlikely situation, and it was too glittering and small for a glowworm. Then, as he looked, it winked at him, and so declared itself to be an eye, and a small face gradually grew up around it, like a frame around a picture. A brown little face, with whiskers. A grave, round face, with the same twinkle in its eye that had first attracted his notice. Small, neat ears, and thick, silky hair. It was a water rat. Then the two animals stood and regarded each other cautiously. "Hello, Mole," said Water Rat. "Hello, Rat," said Mole. "Would you like to come over?" inquired the rat presently. "Oh, it's very well to talk," said the Mole rather pettishly, he being new to a river and riverside life and its ways. The rat said nothing, but stooped and unfastened a rope and hauled on it, then lightly stepped into a little boat which Mole had not observed. It was painted blue outside and white within, and was just the size for two animals. Mole's whole heart went out to it at once, even though he did not yet fully understand its uses. The rat sculled smartly across and made fast. Then he held up his forepaw as the Mole stepped down gingerly. "Lean on that," he said. "And now then, step lively." And the Mole, to his surprise and rapture, found himself actually seated in the stern of a real boat. "This has been a wonderful day," said he, as the rat shoved off and took the sculls again. "Do you know, I've never been in a boat before in all my life." "What?" cried the rat, open-mouthed. "Never been in a... You've never... Well, What have you been doing then?" "Is it so nice as all that?" asked the Mole shyly, though he was quite prepared to believe it as he leaned back in his seat and surveyed the cushions, the oars and the rowlocks, and all the fascinating fittings, as he felt the boat sway lightly under him. "Nice. It's the only thing," said the Water Rat solemnly, as he leant forward for his stroke. "Believe me, my young friend, there is nothing, absolutely nothing, half so much worth doing as simply messing about in boats." Simply messing, he dreamed. Messing about in boats. Messing... "Look out, Rat!" cried the Mole suddenly. It was too late. The boat struck the bank full tilt. The dreamer, the joyous oarsman, lay on his back at the bottom of the boat, his heels in the air. "About in boats or with boats," the rat went on composedly, picking himself up with a pleasant laugh. "In or out of them, it doesn't matter. Nothing seems really to matter, that's the charm of it. Whether you get away or whether you don't. Whether you arrive at your destination or reach somewhere else. Whether you never get anywhere at all. You're always busy, and you never do anything in particular. And when you're done, there's always something else to do. And you can do it if you like, but you'd much better not. Look here, if you've really nothing else on at hand this morning, suppose we drop down the river together and have a long day of it?" The Mole waggled his toes with sheer happiness, spread his chest with a sigh of full contentment, and leant back blissfully onto the soft cushions. "What a day I'm having," he said. "Let us start at once." "Hold hard a minute then," said Rat, and he looped the painter through a ring in the landing stage, climbing up into the hole above, and after a short interval he reappeared, staggering under a fat wicker luncheon basket. "Shove that under your feet," he observed to Mole as he passed it down into the boat, then untied the painter and took to the sculls again. "What's inside it?" said Mole, wriggling with curiosity. "There's cold chicken inside it," replied the rat. cold tongue, cold ham, cold beef, pickled gherkins, salad, French rolls, cress, sandwiches, potted meat, ginger beer, lemonade, soda water. Oh, stop, stop, cried the moles in ecstasies. This is too much. Do you really think so? Inquired the rat seriously. It's only what I always take on these little excursions, and the other animals are always telling me that I'm a mean beast and cut it very fine. The mole never heard a word he was saying, absorbed in the new life he was entering upon, intoxicated with the sparkle, the ripple, the scents and the sounds and the sunlight. He trailed a paw in the water and dreamed long waking dreams. The water rat, like the good fellow he was, sculled steadily along and forebode to disturb him. "I like your clothes awfully, old chap," he remarked after some half an hour or so had passed. "I'm going to get a black velvet smoking suit myself some day, as soon as I can afford it." "I beg your pardon," said Mole, pulling himself together with an effort. "You might think me very rude, but this is all so new to me. So is this a river?" "The river," corrected Rat. "And you really live by the river? What a jolly life!" "By it, and with it, and on it, and in it," said the rat. "It's brother and sister to me, and aunts and company, and food and drink, and, naturally, washing. It's my world, and I don't want any other. What it hasn't got is not worth having, and what it doesn't know is not worth knowing. Lord, the times we've had together, whether in winter, or summer, or spring, or autumn, it's always got its fun and its excitements. When the floods are on in February, my cellars and basement are brimming with drinks that's no good to me, and the brown water runs by my best bedroom window. Or again, when it all drops away and shows patches of mud that smell like plum cake, and rushes and weed clog the channels, and I can potter about dry shod over most of the bed and find fresh food to eat and things careless people have dropped out of boats." "But isn't it a bit dull at times?" the mole ventured to ask. "Just you and the river and no one else to pass a word with?" "No one else to... Well, I mustn't be hard on you," said the rat with forbearance. "You're new to it, and of course you don't know. The bank is so crowded nowadays that many people are moving away altogether. Oh no, it isn't what it used to be. Otters, kingfishers, dab chicks, moorhens, all of them about all day long and always wanting you to do something. As if a fellow had no business of his own to attend to." "What lies over there?" asked Mole, waving a paw towards a background of woodland that darkly framed the water meadows on the side of the river. "That? Oh, that's just the wildwood," said the rat shortly. "We don't go there very often, we riverbankers." Aren't they very nice people in there?" said the mole a trifle nervously. "Well," replied the rat, "let me see. The squirrels are all right, and the rabbits, some of them, but rabbits are a mixed lot, and then there's Badger, of course. He lives right in the heart of it. Wouldn't live anywhere else. Not if you paid him to do it. Dear old Badger. Nobody interferes with him. They'd better not," he added significantly. "Why would they not interfere with him?" asked Mole. "Well, of course, there are others," explained the rat in an hesitating sort of way. "Weasels and stoats and foxes and so on. They're all right in a way. I'm very good friends with them. Pass the time of day when we meet and all that, but they break out sometimes. There's no denying it, and then, well, you can't really trust them. That's the fact." The mole knew well it was quite against animal etiquette to dwell on possible trouble ahead, or even allude to it, so he dropped the subject. "And beyond the wildwood again?" he asked, "where it's all blue and dim, and one sees what may be hills, or perhaps they mayn't, and something like a smoke of towns, or is it only cloud drift?" "Beyond the wildwood comes the wide world," said the rat, "and that's something that doesn't matter. either to you or to me. I've never been there, and I'm never going. Nor you either, if you've got any sense. Don't refer to it ever again, please. Now then, here's our backwater at last. We're going to have lunch. Leaving the main stream, they now paused in what seemed at first sight to be a little landlocked lake. Green turf sloped down to either edge. Brown, snaky tree roots gleamed below the surface of the quiet water, whilst ahead of them the silvery shoulder and foamy tumble of a weir, arm in arm with a restless, dripping mill wheel that held up in turn a grey gabled mill house, filled the air with a smooth, soothing murmur of sound, dull and smothery, yet with it clear voices speaking out at cheerful intervals. It was so very beautiful that Mole could only hold up both forepaws and gasp, "Oh my! Oh my! Oh my!" The rat brought the boat alongside the bank, made her fast, helped the still awkward Mole safely ashore, and swung out the luncheon basket. The Mole begged, as a favour, to be allowed to unpack it all by himself. The rat was very pleased to indulge him, and sprawl at full length on the grass and rest, while his excited little friend shook out the tablecloth and spread it, took out all the mysterious packets one by one, and arranged their contents in due order, still gasping, oh my, at fresh revelation. When all was ready, the rat said, "Now, pitch in, old fellow," and the Mole was very glad indeed to obey. For he had started his spring cleaning very early that morning, as most people will do, and had not paused for bite or sup. And he had been through a very great deal since that distant time, which now seemed almost days ago. "What are you looking at?" said Rat presently, when the edge of their hunger was somewhat dulled, and the Mole's eyes were able to wander off the tablecloth. "I am looking," said the Mole, "at a streak of bubbles that I see travelling along the surface of the water. That is a thing that strikes me as funny." "Bubbles! Ho ho!" said the rat, and chirruped cheerily in an inviting sort of way. A broad, glistening muddle shoved itself above the edge of the bank, and the otter hauled itself out and shook the water from its coat. "Greedy beggars!" he observed, making for the provender. "Why didn't you invite me, Ratty?" "That was an impromptu affair," explained the rat. "By the way, my friend, Mr. Mole." "Proud, I'm sure," said the otter, and the two animals were friends forthwith. There was a rustle behind them, proceeding from a hedge wherein last year's leaves still clung thick, and a stripy head with high shoulders behind it peered forth on them. "Ah, come on, old badger!" shouted Rat. The badger trotted forward a pace or two, then grunted, "Company," and turned his back and disappeared from view. "That's just the sort of fellow he is," observed the disappointed Rat. "Simply hates society. Now, we shan't see any more of him today. Well, tell us, who's out on the river?" "Toad's out for one," replied the otter, "in his brand new wager boat, new togs and everything." The animals looked at each other and laughed. "Once it was nothing but sealing," said the rat. "Then he tired of that and took to punting. Nothing would please him but to punt about all day and every day, and a nice mess he made of it. Last year it was houseboating, and we all had to go and stay with him on his houseboat and pretend that we liked it. He's going to spend the rest of his life in his boathouse. It's all the same. Whatever he takes up he gets tired of and starts on something afresh." "Such a good fellow, too," remarked the otter reflectively, "but no stability, especially on a boat." From where they sat they could get a glimpse of the main stream and the islands that separated them, and just then a wager boat flashed into view. The rower, a short, stout figure, splashing badly and rolling a great deal, but working his hardest. The rat stood up and hailed him, but Toad, for it was he, shook his head and settled sternly to his work. "He'll be out of the boat in a minute if he rolls like that," said the rat, sitting down again. "Of course he will," chuckled the otter. "Did I ever tell you about the good old story of Toad and the lockkeeper?" It happened this way. Toad! An errant mayfly swerved unsteadily athwart the current in the intoxicated fashion affected by the young bloods of mayflies seeing life. A swirl of water, and cloop. The mayfly was visible no more. Neither was the otter. The mole looked down. The voice was still in his ears, but the turf whereon it had sprawled was clearly vacant. Not an otter to be seen, as far as the distant horizon. But again there was a streak of bubbles on the surface of the river. The rat hummed a tune, and Mole recollected that animal etiquette forbade of any sort of comments on the disappearance of one's friends at any moment, for any reason or no reason whatsoever. Well, well, said the rat, I suppose we ought to get moving. Wonder which of us had better pack up the luncheon basket. He did not speak as if he was frightfully eager for that treat. Oh, please let me, said the mole. So, of course, Rat let him. Packing the basket was not quite such pleasant work as unpacking the basket. It never is. But Mole was bent on enjoying everything, and although when he had got the basket packed and strapped up tightly, he saw a plate staring up at him from the grass, and when he had the job done again, the rat pointed out a fork which nobody ought to have seen, and at last, behold, the mustard pot, which he had been sitting on without knowing it. Still, somehow, the thing got finished at last, without much loss of temper. The afternoon sun was getting low as Rat sculled gently homewards in a dreamy mood, murmuring poetry things over to himself, not paying much attention to Mole. But Mole was very much full of lunch and self-satisfaction and pride, and already quite at home in a boat, so he thought. He was getting a bit restless besides, and presently he said, Ratty, please, I want to row now. The rat shook his head with a smile. Not yet, my young friend, he said. Wait till you've had a few lessons. It's no as easy as it looks. The mole was quiet for a minute or two, but he began to feel more and more jealous of Rat, sculling so strongly and so easily along, and his pride began to whisper that he could do it every bit as well. He jumped up and seized the sculls, so suddenly that Rat, who was gazing out over the water and saying more poetry things to himself, was taken by surprise, and he fell backwards off his seat with his legs in the air for the second time, while the triumphant Mole took his place and grabbed the sculls with confidence. Stop it, you silly one, cried the rat from the bottom of the boat. You can't do it, you'll have us over. The Mole flung his sculls back with a flourish and made a great dig in the water. He missed the surface altogether, his legs flew up above his head, and he found himself lying on top of the prostrate rat, greatly alarmed. He made a grab at the side of the boat, and the next moment, sploosh! Over went the boat, and he found himself struggling in the river. Oh my, how cold the water was, and oh, how very wet it felt, how it sung in his ears as he went down, 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 how bright and welcoming the sun looked as he rose to the surface, coughing and spluttering. How black was his despair when he felt himself sinking again. Then a paw gripped him firmly by the back of his neck. It was the rat, and he was evidently laughing. The mole could feel him laughing, right down his arm and through his paw, and so into his, the mole's, neck. The rat got hold of a skull and shoved it under Mole's arm, and then did the same with the other side of him, and, swimming behind, propelled the helpless animal to the shore, hauled him out and set him down on the bank, a squashy, pulpy lump of misery. When the rat had rubbed him down a bit and wrung some of the wet out of him, he said, Now then, old fellow, trot up and down the towing path as hard as you can till you're warm and dry again, while I dive down for the luncheon basket. So the dismal Mole, wet and ashamed, trotted about until it was fairly dry, while the rat plunged into the water again, recovered the boat and righted her and made her fast, fetched his floating property to the shore by degrees, and finally dived successfully for the luncheon basket and struggled to land with it. When all was ready for a start once more, the mole, limp and dejected, took his seat in the stern of the boat and they set off. He said in a low voice, broken with emotion, "Ratty, my generous friend, I am very sorry indeed for my foolish and ungrateful conduct. My heart quite fails me when I think how I might have lost that beautiful luncheon basket. Indeed, I have been a complete fool, and I know it. Will you overlook this once and forgive me, and let things go on as before?" "That's all right, bless you," responded the rat cheerily. "What's a little wet to a water rat? I'm more at home in the water bit than out of it most days. Don't you think any more about it, and look here, I really think you'd better come and stop with me for a little time. It's very plain and rough, you know, not like Toad's house at all, but you haven't seen it yet. Still, I can make you comfortable, and I'll teach you how to row and swim, and you'll soon be as handy on the water as any of us." The mole was touched by his kind manner of speaking, that he could find no answer to the question, and he had to brush away a tear or two with the back of his paw. But the rat kindly looked in another direction, and presently the mole's spirits revived again, and he was even able to give some straight back talk to a couple of moorhens who were sniggering to each other about his bedraggled appearance. When they got home, the rat made a bright fire in the parlour and planted the mole in an armchair in front of it, having fetched a dressing gown and slippers for him, and told him river stories until supper time. Very thrilling stories they were too, to an earth-dwelling mammal like mole. Stories about weirs and sudden floods, and leaping pikes, and steamers that flung hard bottles. At least bottles were certainly flung, and from steamers, so presumably by them, and about herons, and how particular they were about whom they spoke to, and about adventures down drains, and night fishings with the otters, or excursions far afield with badger. Supper was a most cheerful meal, but shortly afterwards a terribly sleepy mole had to be escorted upstairs by his considerate host to the best bedroom, where he soon lay his head on the pillow in great peace and contentment, knowing that he had found his new friend, and that the river would lap gently at his bedroom window. This was only the first of many similar days for the emancipated mole, each of them longer and more full of interest as the ripening summer moved onwards. He learnt to swim and to row, and entered into the joy of running water. With his ear to the reed stems he caught at intervals something of what the wind went whispering so constantly among them. There we go. That's the end of chapter 1 and the end of our video for today. My challenge for you is to go and find out 3 interesting facts about moles, because they are pretty fascinating creatures, and one that I don't know about you, but I have never seen in real life. So go find me 3 facts about moles, stick them in the comments down there, and if you get a really interesting one, then maybe I will have to share it on Twitter. Thank you all, and I will see you tomorrow.